In there now.
Just
So
updating my Magda.
webinar is now live. Welcome everybody. We're just waiting for people to sign in. So if you just bear with us for 1 second. Yeah, participants are still joining there now. So just give them 1 more minute before we kick off. What a beautiful morning this morning. If you have seen it, Frank, I see you're looking out the window. I don't think you've seen the sunshine yet today.
I haven't been out for 2 days, so the new world for us.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we'll kick off because I know we want to try and get to as many questions as we possibly can. So look, you're very welcome to this morning's webinar, and our topic today is Trader Support Services and the key enhancements update, really. That's the key purpose of it. And my name is Paul Clancy and I'm CEO of the Chamber. And look, we're delighted that so many of you could join us this morning. The webinar for Chamber members aims to provide a full update on the free-to-use digital trader service support. Since TSS went live on the 21st of December, there have been a number of key enhancements and releases to the TSS service, and we'll cover some of that this morning as well. Our webinar will be presented by Shankar Singham and Frank Dunsmuir, who are senior members of TSS, and Shankar is the Chief Executive of Competair, and Frank is the Industry Lead for Customs and Trade at Fujitsu UK and Ireland. And Shankar and Frank are joined on the panel by Shanali Jashani of Fujitsu, who is currently supporting and delivering on the TSS, Magda Brazos-Waskina Denny, and Daniel Garnon from the Institute of Export and International Trade, as well as Eleanor Patterson of the HMRC. So look, we have an extensive panel here to support any questions you may have. Some questions we've already received in advance, and we'll get through those. Magda and Dan will be there, supported by Shanali, to answer any questions you may have. So please use the text box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll work through those during the webinar. So really looking forward to this morning's session. Some major challenges out there, I know, for businesses, which have been well documented, but we're really looking forward to and welcoming back Shankar and the team. So if I could hand over to you, Shankar, without further ado. Many thanks.
Great, thanks very much. It's really good to be here, Paul. So if we can make that bigger, yeah. So we'll just really quickly go over the status of the TSS at the moment, the most recent stats update. We'll then review the GBNI process, because one of the major things that's happened most recently, as of February the 15th, is our supplementary declarations. You will have received from the TSS requests for further information, so supplementary declarations can be done. So we want to review, why you're receiving that information. We're going to talk about the transit service, both Holyhead, Dublin, so GB to NI via Irish ports, and also NI to GB via Irish ports, and we are supporting both of those movements. Now we'll talk about consignment first, which is the model for doing the entry safety and security, the entry summary declaration, particularly focused on groupage hauliers, because we had heard from them that they were having difficulty with the TSS system because they didn't necessarily know where every good was being picked up at the beginning of their journey. And so we've done a consignment first model for them. We'll then talk about the SFD for what is sort of TSS control goods, which is not just customs control goods, but also SPS and products of animal origin, all of those goods, which went live on February the 15th. And we'll talk about the supplementary declarations and the tariff options at the end. So if we go to the next slide, just to recap on what the TSS is doing. It is a digital first service. So we have 750 people in the contact center. The tier one, there are three tiers of agents in the contact center. There are tier ones who are designed to deal with, or who are, the aim is that they can deal with your registration and password questions. Then you have tier twos who are have at least 2 years of customs experience, so they can handle some of the customs inquiries. And then you have the tier threes who have at least 7 years customs experience. Some of them have 20 or 30 years of customs experience. So we're joined by Dan on the call today. And they can answer, more specific inquiries. And it's the tier 3s who have been reaching out to traders to help them with their supplementary declarations. There's quite a lot of outbound calling from the contact center, which wasn't sort of initially envisaged when we put the service together, but we are doing more of that. But we are not set up to be, to completely replace the intermediary market in Northern Ireland. So we're not TSS is not designed to essentially be like your lawyer or your accountancy firm, who you would go to with quite more general questions about I move goods from GB to NI. Tell me what the best way of doing that is. That's not the kind of question that TSS is set up to do, because literally we have to do 10 million declarations in a year, and we won't be able to provide that kind of bespoke individualized service, nor frankly do we want to disrupt massively the intermediary market. The TSS is a temporary service, and when it exits the market, we've got to leave a vibrant intermediary market that can support traders. TSS does not raise the export health certificates, the other licenses that you need from other government departments. We will advise you on it, we will educate you on it, and certainly we have put together a huge amount of information that is available on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy website. And we really strongly urge you, if you're not a regular downloader of information on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy website, you really do need to do that, because a lot of the questions we are getting, all the answers are in the NICTA material, the data guides, the user guides, the knowledge articles, and we're constantly refining those to make them more user friendly. We're trying to eliminate the jargon, that unfortunately in the customs area, virtually every other word is an acronym. So we're trying to make sure that we make those more user friendly. So please do use all of those, and many of you are. So we've had probably at this point almost 320,000 downloads of NICTA material, and that is basically more than, given the time that it's happened in, more than your typical university. So it's there, it's completely free. Please take advantage of it. If we go to the next slide. So just on the metrics, most recently, so the ENS declarations, the entry, so this is the safety and security declaration. This is the first declaration that's the responsibility of the whole year. We've done over 300,000 of those since the 1st of January, over 245,000 simplified frontier declarations. That's the first bit. TSS has broken up the import declaration into two: a simplified frontier declaration, because we wanted to prioritize flow over the frontier, over the boundary, but you obviously have to do the supplementary declaration. That's a legal requirement at the end, and we've done 245,000 of the simplified frontier declarations, and now with the supplementary declarations going live since February the 15th, we're seeing over 110,000 of those. Just to explain the little drop between week of March 1st and week of March 8th, we were able to get for traders who were unable, who were making a good faith attempt to do their supplementary declarations for the February 15th to end of February movements, which would have been due or should have been due on March the 4th. We were able to get an agreement that they didn't have to, they wouldn't be penalized for not doing those, provided they were making a good faith effort to do it, and provide, and of course for those traders for whom the functionality isn't yet there, they wouldn't have to do those supplementary declarations. So the little bit of a fall off, because it's human nature. You told somebody you don't have to do something, then there's an immediate downturn. But I expect that to kick up again as we go through the month of March. Highlights here, it is digital first. We've gone from 65 to about 83% of inquiries raised online. So it is very much operating as a digital first service. Contrary to some of the media reports, it's not been down at all, and inbound calls answered within 6 seconds. Import declarations, SFDs, have been done 98% within 15 minutes of the initial request. Now, while case numbers have fallen in the last week, there is significant outbound process there. So the case numbers, the inbound, has fallen. But that's largely because we're doing a lot of outbound work from the contact center. Payments, we expect to start processing those during this month. And that will be on the TSS duty deferment account. And again, we now have 36,000. Almost every time I do this presentation, there's another 1,000 registered traders, and we're now up to 36,000. That's more than 30% of our traders, our registered traders, have come in since the 1st of January. So if we go to the next slide, that's important because it shows that the market thinks that the system is working. And so, that's very useful for us. It's also extremely useful for us to have this many traders because we have a really good sense now of what works, what doesn't work, and we are listening to our trader community. And when people ask us to do things, as you'll see, we do them as much of them as is possible. Consistent with the law, it has to be legally compliant, but we try to make this as simple an experience as possible. Just on the ENS, it's about 1,800 movements at peak. That seems to be fairly stable now. If we go to the next slide, and just a quick recap on the process. So again, to remind. The first step of the process is the supplier, the trader, and the haulier. Sorry, the supplier, the GB supplier, and the Northern Ireland importer agree their Incoterms. The Incoterms are the terms of trade. So this is where you decide if you're going to be DDP or delivered duty paid, or what the terms you're going to use, the terms of trade you're going to use. Only in the case of delivered duty paid is the obligation to do the customs declaration with the GB supplier. In all other cases, it's the Northern Ireland importer that has the obligation to do the customs declaration. The customs declaration is the SFD and the supplementary declaration, the SDI. The obligation for the entry summary declaration, the ENS declaration, is with the haulier. Now, just because the legal obligation is with the haulier for the ENS and the legal obligation on the SFD is with the trader, be that importer or supplier, does not mean you cannot agree, the trader and the haulier cannot agree exactly who's going to put what information on the TSS portals, and you should do that because the TSS portals will take that information from both parties or either party or some combination. And the first thing that happens is the ENS is populated. That declaration goes into ICS Northern Ireland, which is the system in Northern Ireland that deals with the safety and security declarations. And TSS will generate the simplified frontier declaration. Now, for most goods, TSS provides the MRNs, the movement reference numbers, for the carrier. The carrier, the haulier, then goes to the government system, GVMS, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, which is not TSS doesn't support directly, but the haulier will go to that system and will get from GVMS a goods movement reference number. It's the GMR that is your passport that essentially gets you through the ferry terminal. Goods are then transported from GB to Northern Ireland, cleared, and then they go to Northern Ireland premises. Once the delivery is complete, again, by the fourth day of the month, fourth working day of the month following the month of the movement, TSS will go to the trader, and it'll be the relevant trader depending on the Incoterms. So generally it will be the Northern Ireland importer unless you're on DDP terms, and we will ask for further information for the supplementary declaration. And that is the point at which you would think about, what duty do I have to pay, if any? How do I minimize my tariff obligations? And you need a strategy for that. And I'll talk at the end of the presentation about how you determine the answers to those questions. We also have a tariff guide that you need to look at to walk you through this process. And we had a very specific webinar on this issue of am I in the UK trader scheme? What does the UK EU trade agreement say? Can I use a waiver? All of those questions are answered in both the webinar and the tariff guide. And then if you do have to pay a duty, there may be a repayments or rebate mechanism that is being put in place at the moment. If we go to the next slide. So I'll very quickly go over transit. There are two ways of getting goods to move through the Irish ports. Either transit, which TSS supports, and we've stood up that system for about a month now, or a direct export to Ireland, with all of the requirements that a direct export to Ireland involves, which is basically like any other export to a European member state. So you've got everything. You've got the export process from GB, you've got the import process in Ireland in its entirety. And that's why transit is obviously the better thing to use. And if we go to the next slide. So, why would you use transit? Well, you don't have to do essentially export declarations, exit summary declarations, the EXS declaration out of GB. You don't have to do the import declaration into Ireland, and the all of the Irish customs processes. You minimize those by using TSS Transit, and so it's a much cheaper way. And this is a quote from Hans Maassen, who is the one of the global authorities on transit and former head of the Dutch Customs Brokers Association. The Dutch are very, very good at transit, and that he thinks it's a simplified process, pragmatic, innovative, etc. So we work quite hard to get this process to be as simple as possible for traders. We're putting in place even more optionality on this transit route, which will be available hopefully in the next few days, which will also make it easier, and it's very relevant here to this group, because it will make it a lot easier to use transit to move your goods to the western part of Northern Ireland. So we'll have additional authorized consignee locations in the western part of Northern Ireland, which will make it a lot easier to use this process. So if we go to the next slide. So just to quickly summarize, what you do if you're using TSS Transit, you'd submit your ENS declaration information on the portal in the same way, but you'll select the GBNI via Ireland route option. We will send a transit template for you to complete and return. TSS will then send you the MRN for the ENS system. The MRN, remember, is the movement reference number. ENS is the entry summary declaration. That's the safety and security declaration. That's what the haulier does. And we will also send the transit LRN, the transit local reference number, and then the truck needs to be sealed. Now, most of the transit is relevant to hauliers. So the trader will simply have an arrangement with a haulier to get their stuff into Northern Ireland, and it's the haulier who will be engaged with this process. You arrive at the office of departure, which it would be if it's Holyhead, it would be the Road King facility in Holyhead. You start the transit, you collect the transit accompanying document, the written, the printed form. TSS will notify Border Force at the beginning of the transit. There's a 6-hour window, or rather a 6-hour period in which Border Force may notify the trader that they need to be inspected. That's a very rare thing. But if it does happen, then you need to respond to Border Force's instructions. The only thing that the haulier has to do that TSS will not do for you is the PBN, the pre-boarding notification on this is the Irish RoRo system, which is the equivalent of the Goods Vehicle Movement Service for the UK. The Irish PBN system is very straightforward. And if you look at the webinar on this, you'll see a presentation by the Irish Revenue Commission where they walk through how you put in the PBN. It's very, very simple. Anyone who's used any portal on the internet for anything, you know, it's sort of that level of simplicity. You complete the ferry crossing from GB to Ireland, and that fulfills the officered transit requirements. Clear the Irish port, continue to your Northern Ireland destination, and then you've got a choice here: either remote closing, so you go straight to your destination and you can unload your goods there, provided you've not heard from Border Force, or go to the authorised consignee location, and the authorised consignee will close the transit for you. And contact TSS and we'll handle all of that on your behalf, but you can simply then go on to your final destination. And as I say, there will be a number of authorized consignee locations in place for TSS very shortly on the routes into Derry, Londonderry. So that should make life a lot easier if you're using transit. And then you do the normal customs process that closes the transit process through the simplified frontier declaration, which is created when you first go into TSS and do the ENS, and it's held there. It's then submitted, and the supplementary declaration information is requested by the 4th working day of the month following the movement. If we go to the next slide. If you are moving SPS goods in transit using Irish ports, then there is a additional thing that needs to happen, which is you need to, for SPS and SPS only, if you're using this route for those goods, then you do need to do the traces NT, but it needs to be done into the Irish system. Now, a Northern Ireland importer can certainly do that under the terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but you need to be registered on the Irish traces system. You need to do your CHED form for 24 hours. The CHED is the Common Health Entry Declaration. That's the traces registration piece. And that has to be done 24 hours in advance of arrival. Again, just for SPS and SPS only, this is as if you are entering the entering Ireland for SPS purposes, which means that there will be the full SPS process, the export health certificate, the potential for a check in the border control post in the Irish port of entry. Now that's rare, provided you've got all the documents in place. If you don't, then you will be checked and you will be held up. So if you're moving SPS goods, make sure that you've covered all of those bases as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So for Northern Ireland to GB, and people, our trader community, have said we really want this to be resolved. So we have stood this up now. We will move Northern Ireland to GB via Irish ports as an indirect export. We won't, TSS, you can use transit to do this, NI to GB via Ireland, transit. But we won't do that, and that's really because of a provision of the Northern Ireland Protocol that says that for exports you don't have any process. It's unfettered trade, unfettered access, except the 14 treaty examples like CITES, endangered species, Kimberley diamond mining, those sorts of very specific things, or it's goods moving in duty suspension. And technically transit is a good moving in duty suspension, which means we would have to do the export declarations plus the transit documents. So that's not a very simple process for traders. So we've essentially said, look, you can do that if you want to do it through other people, but we are not going to do it because we don't think that people are going to want to use that in general terms. And we will instead support the indirect export. And if we go to the next slide. So indirect export means that you will submit, or we will submit on your behalf, an indirect export declaration into CDS. So we will use Northern Ireland as the port of export and the Irish port as the port of exit. We will provide the export declaration, all those movement reference numbers. The trader again, or the haulier again, will create the PBN itself, and it's a very straightforward process, as I mentioned, and as is clear from the webinar. and that's pretty much all you have to do. Now, because of the recently announced easements and extensions with regard to the GB border for SPS purposes, in other words, the delay on requiring full import declarations into GB and IPAFs, which is the GB's version of traces, the registration system, you don't have a lot of process getting into GB. So that is good. That makes it very simple. It's time limited though, but we are working to ensure with all of these, as with all of these routes, we're constantly working to ensure that they are continually made as simple as possible. So it's a very straightforward route, and we certainly encourage you to use it. If we go to the next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Frank now to talk about consignment first, which is the groupage model. Thanks.
Thanks, Shankar. I'll cover three main topics actually. Or introduce them. We updated TSS around about mid-February, 14th, 15th of February, with a few more features. And that will continue as a process going through the year, where we'll be launching new releases of TSS with improved and increasing the range of functionality. So a little bit later on this month, there'll be things like payment processing will be introduced. So there's three topics I wanted to cover in terms of updates are consignment first. What is that? What does that allow you to do? We also introduced updates to the simplified frontier declaration. So it now has additional fields to cope with controlled goods, or those the information required by controlled goods. And the third area is we've introduced the first phase of supplementary declarations. So a number of traders can now, or certain types of traders can now input their supplementary declarations. So the first one is consignment first. I'll go through, and on the next slide there's a diagram which is easier to look at, and I'll explain what consignment first is. The very first version of TSS has and still has a structure of for the information that's put into it of three structures or three layers: header, consignments, and items. And this allows us, by input, when organizations put that data in to the system, allows us to create the declarations required for the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So it allows us to create the entry, safety and security declaration for the vehicle, and it allows us to create simplified frontier declarations for the consignments within the vehicle that's being carried. So the normal operation would be log into the TSS service under your account, enter the header details, which essentially captures the vehicle and journey details, and that goes on to create the entry, safety and security declaration, which is looking at the vehicle itself, and a high-level description of the goods inside the vehicle. You then have to create a consignment record that goes with that header, and the consignment is a delivery from a consignor to a consignee, or a seller to a buyer. So that shipment of consignments is registered, and at the consignment level, you're telling the system who is the seller and who is the buyer, essentially. That's the key information there. And then you're adding items onto those consignments. So which items are you actually moving or being sold as part of that consignment? And that process, once you've completed that set of records, and bear in mind you may have more than one consignment on the vehicle, because that particular haulier may be carrying goods for more than one customer at any one time. So once that record is completed, the record itself is submitted, and the entry, safety and security declaration is provided, and simplified frontier declarations for the consignments are created, and the consignee is notified that those declarations have been raised. And that process works very well. It works very well for most organizations. But then we had feedback from some what we call groupage hauliers who will collect multiple consignments, sometimes from different locations, saying that they actually start with the consignment first, and could they have a feature that reflects that. So on the next page, we very quickly developed additional functionality in TSS, and this was quite an achievement in a short period of time, to create what's called a consignment first model. What that allows the system to do, or allows you to do on the system, is create a consignment and the items on their own on the system. So I could be, the model I usually use is Acme Paint Company, not very inventive, in Great Britain as Trader 1. And as I receive orders from traders in Northern Ireland, I create a consignment, which is the order detail on the TSS, on my account on the TSS. So I can build that up in my own time, and I list the items that go with that order. So this might be a delivery for a DIY outlet in Northern Ireland, and they might be buying 3 tins of paint that I put on the items. And equally, Trader 2, Trader 3, all the other traders can use the same model. So I'm entering my order details and the items as I go through my normal work. I can't submit those records. They can't go anywhere. They will just exist as records on the TSS to start with. But then I'm going to arrange transport. So I phone up my preferred haulier and arrange transport for my 3 tins of paint to Northern Ireland. Once I'm happy with the agreement with the haulier, all I need to do is put the EORI number of the haulier into the consignment, and it will show the consignment to the haulier. So I've done the input, and now I've passed it through to the haulier, and we can both see that consignment. So when the haulier is ready, they will be getting these consignments in their list on their account on the TSS. And when they're ready and they've decided which goods are going, or which consignments are going on which particular vehicle, so they're doing their transport planning, they will simply create a header record for that vehicle and that journey, and then they will pull in the consignments that they have decided will go on that journey. And it's literally is a question of a tick box against those consignments. So this allows the haulier to work in the mode that they normally work, or for groupage mode, which is thinking about the consignments they have, how they break those into various vehicles and plan them into the vehicles, and then create the entry safety and security declaration at the end. They can move those consignments around until such time that they've actually made the submission and created the declarations. The other benefit of this is you can see it nicely spreads the workload now. So previously it was mainly the haulier that was doing the submissions. Now it's a lot easier to split the workload between the traders and the haulage companies using this model. And the second thing that this does is the items themselves, sometimes particularly with controlled goods and food and products of animal and plant origin, they will need commodity code details and price details on them at the frontier declaration level. If you do need to put those in as a trader, those details don't go to the haulier. They stay with your records. So the haulier can't see those pricing details. So if Trader 1 and Trader 2 are in competition with each other and using the same haulier, the commercial information doesn't get shared. So a little bit of advantage, some advantages there. And then on the next slide, we point to, throughout the presentation, we'll share this with you, we point to the links to videos and user guides. So that's a short video on how to use the consignment first model if you're interested. And on the next page, controlled goods. So the second feature that we launched in mid-February is we updated the simplified frontier process, simplified frontier declaration procedure, to capture more information if the goods are in what we call controlled, and that includes goods that are subject to licenses, quotas, restrictions, and of course food and products of animal and plant origin. So you'll see now, if your goods fall in that category, you'll see additional information required at the simplified frontier declaration input. And on the next slide, I'm aware that this is not specifically an audience that's dedicated to SPS goods, which is product of plant and animal origin. But I'll use this as an illustration of what the new process looks like. So in the case of SPS goods, the buyer and the seller have a role. The buyer has to create what's called a CHED form, a Common Health Entry Declaration, and that states basic information about the product itself and the journey and the transport details, and it makes the transaction visible to the border health authorities, port health authorities, and organisations like DERA and DEFRA. So that gives them visibility that this is happening. And the seller is responsible for creating an export health certificate. Between them, they decide who's going to do the declaration. But the important point here is for controlled goods of one nature or another, there are typically certificates, licenses, or checks that need to happen in addition to the declarations. And in this case, it's a CHED and a health certificate. And on the next slide, this busy slide shows you the workflow, which I won't go through in details, but on the left-hand side, the very left-hand side in blue, are the organizations that are involved in moving SPS goods. Say we're moving goods from Larne to, from Kenryan to Larne, in this as an example. This is typical of the procedures that they would go through. So you've got supplier, buyer, TSS, government systems, carriers, and Port Health Authority. And the process goes from bottom left over to the right, and you follow the arrows as who's doing what. But essentially, in the left-hand third, you've got the pre-customs bit, which is where you're creating the health certificate, and the CHED certificate is being created. And the creation of those documents and those inspections and the seal that goes on the vehicle all result in references that are important for the declaration. And that's the point we want to make here. Whether you're carrying food products or it could be other goods that are controlled, there will be some licenses or some certificates needed, and there'll be reference numbers. Those in the middle block is the familiar TSS process of how we raise the declarations, the entry and the safety and security and the Simplified Frontier Declaration. So in the latest version of the TSS product, the information from the CHED in this example and the health certificate and those reference numbers will need to go into the declaration as the declarations are raised in the middle block there. And once that's done correctly, the process is as you're familiar with, GVMS, and the goods then get transported to their destination. And on the next slide, the way we've, there's a link here, I forgot about this slide. There's a link on this slide to the traces system. If you do need to move these types of products, you need to make sure you're registered on traces. But equally, if you need other types of licenses, you may need access to systems called Peaches or other systems like that, depending on the nature of the product you're moving. And on the next slide, the one I wanted to emphasize is we have created a user guide for how to fill out the Simplified Frontier Declaration with the added fields that are required. And using SPS as a kind of an example in the previous slides is to just give you a bit of context around this. But we wanted to create a more generic user guide. So what we do in the user guide is we show you how to look up the requirements for your products. So the first step would be, and there are 4 boxes here, the top left box is the first step. You will look up on the commodity code, the tariff tool, Northern Ireland tariff tool, and you look up the commodity code for your particular product, and on that page there will be a list of conditions, or there may not be any conditions, but if there are conditions, they'll be listed on that page, and that will tell you whether your goods are subject to any licenses or restrictions or requirements in order for them to be moved and imported into Northern Ireland. So in this particular example, we've got a condition. As you can see in the top left white box, there's an orange rectangle there over condition, and if you click on the condition, it will take you to the top right box, which is veterinary control for all third countries. So this is an SPS example, and it says you need an N853 document, which is a CHED, a Common Health Entry Documentation. And that N853, what do you need to do with that? Again, the bottom two clips there on the bottom left-hand side shows you where in the TSS portal you need to enter this particular document code. So it shows you, click on Document Reference tab, and then on the right-hand side it shows you the box where you put the document code, N853, and just next to that you've got the document reference, so you'll put the CHED reference number in there. So the user guide is there as a generic user guide, and you can it needs to allow you to put in research and identify the right document codes and licenses that require for your products, and we guide you through where to put these on the declaration. It is a piece of work to be done really as a one-off exercise to start with, so making sure you've done this for your products, you understand any restrictions and requirements on your products, and once you've done that, capture and keep that information so that when you get to do your next declaration, you now know this product needs an N852 or 3 rather, and you know where that needs to be inserted in the reference number for it. And then on the next page, we have a video of how to do this as well, and there were links to the declaration on the previous page. And the third item we talked about is supplementary declaration. So the important part of the supplementary declaration is it closes out the movement. So we've moved the goods using simplified frontier process, which is a high-level simplified declaration to get your goods into Northern Ireland. You will then get a request from the TSS once the goods have arrived to say, can you please raise a supplementary declaration? And we'll tell you which frontier declaration it belongs to. It's important to remember here to think about how you keep track of the goods that have moved with the original simplified frontier declaration. So if you've simplified and consolidated the information on the frontier declaration, you will need to keep records of the goods that you've imported as part of that declaration. So you can actually list them out in more detail here. And it's at this point that things like the at-risk statements are made, and if there are any duties liable, they may be calculated at this point as well. The other point to remember here is that the request goes to the organization whose EORI number has been placed in the importer field on the frontier declaration. So you have consignee, consignor, importer and exporter, and it's the importer EORI number that we believe is the owner of the supplementary declaration. So that's an important field to get right. And on the next page, we'll go to the next one. Let's do some time. As a timeline cycle, if you're moving goods in month 1, you need to complete the supplementary declaration by the 4th working day of the following month. So if you're moving goods today, 16th of March, then the supplementary declaration will be due by the 4th of April. But because there are a couple of bank holidays there, it's something like the 6th or the 7th, I believe, of April will be the 4th working day. I must check that. But you don't have to wait until that date. You can submit the supplementary declaration beforehand, which prevents you working last minute, as it were. And on the next page, there is also a guide. This is a more detailed video of how to create a supplementary declaration, because they are a little bit more detailed than before. And rather than spend too much time going through how to submit a supplementary declaration, what we'd like to do is just highlight some of the key areas that you need to think about in terms of if you like, the special codes around Northern Ireland in particular, which is the at-risk processing as well. And I'll hand over to Shankar to talk you through that.
Thanks, Frank. So yeah, we're just going to highlight these things that you really need to know, and we strongly urge you to look at the TSS online guides, the declaration data requirements, which tells you about all the fields and what you need to put in. That is available on the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy website. The most important thing when you start the process, so going back to the header page, there are two potential codes, additional information codes that you need to fill in. You use NI-DOM for goods moving from GB to NI under free circulation. So most people will be using that particular additional information code. You would use NI-IMP for goods moving under special procedures. So for example, if you're moving from a customs warehouse to a customs warehouse, you're moving to an inward processing facility or something like that, you would use NI-IMP. It's very important you get that right, because if you did it wrong, you're going to go through the wrong architecture and end up in the wrong place on the declaration. When it comes time to do the SDI, the supplementary declaration, and the date, by the way, for April is the 6th of April, so it's the 4th business day. So that happens to be the 6th of April. And for each item on the declaration, you need to put in either NI-REM if the goods are not at risk, or NI-AID if you're claiming the waiver for any duties that are due. Now, and I'll talk about that in a second, but so assuming that you're on the UK trader scheme, in other words, you are a not at risk trader and you've made an application to HMRC to be a not at risk trader, then your process does not stop there. You don't just simply assume that you do your supplementary declaration and somebody somewhere knows that you're a not at risk trader and your goods are not at risk. There's a two-step process. You have to be on the trader scheme, and you have to also say in the supplementary declaration that your goods are not at risk, and you make that statement by filling in the NI-REM additional information code. If you want to use the waiver, and you have to have registered for the waiver scheme, the waiver is the subsidy for any duty you might have to pay, you would put in NI-AID. If you don't put in either of those, then you are subject to the rules of origin of the trade agreement between the UK and the EU, and for reasons that I'll explain, you may end up paying a tariff. You may not satisfy those rules of origin, depending on where the product comes from and where its parts come from, and you may end up paying a tariff. So the way to avoid doing that, having to do that, is one of these codes. So it's very important that you put the right one in. There is guidance on the tariff codes, the EU tariff guide on controlled goods, and the online tariff tool there in Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy. That refers to the tariffs and to also the licenses and controls that might apply to your goods. If you go to the next slide. So what we want to do here is help you understand and develop a strategy for how you do a supplementary declaration. So in other words, you shouldn't just wait, do nothing, and then on the 4th day after the month of the movement, suddenly be faced with all of this. You need to be making some decisions right now. And the first decision tree we put up there is for GB to NI trade. And the question you've got to ask is, first of all, is the EU duty rate the common external tariff of the EU? In other words, the tariff that the EU charges to all countries with whom it does not have a specific preferential trade agreement, the general tariff rate, is that 0? If it is, then your goods are not at risk. They're not at risk because there is no fiscal risk to the EU, because there's no duty that would ever have to be paid. So if it's yes, you're not at risk. If it's no, and for most cases it's going to be no, there will be some sort of EU common external tariff. You have to then determine whether you can register for the UK trader scheme. Are you authorised under the UK trader scheme? You cannot be authorised on the UK trader scheme if for goods that are subject to EU trade defence measures. That's part of the agreement between the UK and the EU in the Joint Committee. So provided your goods are not subject to EU trade defence measures, so that would be something like steel. Steel is currently subject to an EU trade defence measure. They're not. Then you have to ask whether you qualify for the UK trader scheme. Now, the general rule here is you qualify for the UK trader scheme if you're selling to consumer-facing facilities, which could be retail, selling directly to retail, or wholesale selling to retail. There is a requirement in the Joint Committee decision that you have a business facility, I mean, a real facility, not a brass plate, not a rep office, in Northern Ireland in order to satisfy for the UK trader scheme. That requirement was subject to an easement, so you didn't need to do it. And that easement was extended until October. So you don't need to be on the UK, you don't need to have a Northern Ireland facility to be on the UK trader scheme until October, when that easement expires. So from a business standpoint, because the decision when that does expire is not retroactive. In other words, the HMRC won't claw back any tariff that you should have paid. From a business standpoint, there is very high upside potential of being on the UK trader scheme and taking advantage of that easement. There is very low downside risk. So it is always something that you should certainly do. And if that's the only reason that's preventing you from being on the UK trader scheme, our advice is sort of think again and apply. There was a February 28th deadline on the UK trader scheme for provisional authorization. That does not mean, the fact that we're beyond that does not mean that you can no longer apply. You can absolutely apply. It's just that there will be an evaluation that HMRC will go through, and that evaluation will take some time. When I say some time, I mean, no more than a month typically, but hopefully quicker than that. So certainly the advice is, if you can be on the UK trader scheme, get on the UK trader scheme. There is a general exemption to the UK trader scheme for commercial processing, but within that commercial processing exemption, there are lots of exceptions. So if, for example, you are in the food sector, if you're in the construction sector, if you're in the healthcare sector, if you're processing products that are ultimately in the not-for-profit sector, all of these are exceptions and allow you to be on the UK trader scheme, provided you satisfy the other criteria. So that's the decision tree, and that will determine whether you're not at risk or you're at risk. Even if you are at risk, you can still claim the de minimis waiver. And what we're saying for traders that are very small is that rather than going through this process, it might be better for you, and I say might because there may be other benefits of the UK trader scheme. It might be better for you to simply go straight to the waiver, claim the waiver, because there is a €200,000 for 3 fiscal years de minimis amount under European state aid rules, which apply to Northern Ireland under the protocol. And that translates, if you assume a manufactured goods tariff of 4%, it works out to about £1.5 million of imports from GB to NI. So if you're in that ballpark, it may well be worth going directly to the waiver. So you register for the waiver and you put NI aid on your supplementary declaration. Now, if none of this applies to you, then you are going to be subject to the EU-UK trade agreement, and you will have to satisfy those rules of origin in order to claim the preferential zero tariff rate. To claim the preferential zero tariff rate, as I say, you have to satisfy rules of origin, which are very specific. They are sector by sector. In addition to changing tariff classification or substantially transforming the product, for many sectors, there are quite stringent local content requirements, so you have to look at those. There are onward processing rules, so if you're bringing something in from the EU, coming into GB for onward distribution to Northern Ireland, and there's no processing of that product, you may end up not qualifying under rules of origin, and you may end up having to pay a tariff. So you need to check all of these things in order to determine whether a duty is paid. And that's one of the reasons that we say for very small traders, go straight to the waiver, because it may well be that otherwise you'd have to go through a pretty complex rule of origin calculation, and we wouldn't want a small trader who could otherwise simply benefit from the waiver to have to go through that process. If nothing can be used and you don't qualify under rules of origin in the trade agreement, you're going to have to pay that common external tariff of the EU. And the only way to avoid that situation is to use special customs procedures, such as returned goods relief, such as customs warehousing, inward processing, outward processing relief. So you need to check those if you fall into that category. And the next decision tree deals with the rest of world into Northern Ireland trade. So we can put the next slide up, please. It's broadly the same decision tree, except that you're always going to have to pay a tariff for rest of world into Northern Ireland. The real question here is, do you pay the UK tariff or do you pay the EU external tariff? And so the decision tree there starts not with whether the EU tariff is 0, but whether it's lower than the UK duty. If it's lower than the UK duty, the European Union thinks there's no fiscal risk, there's no smuggling risk, and therefore it's going to be not at risk. Now, if it's not, if the EU duty is higher than the UK duty, the question then becomes, are you on the UK trader scheme? But there's an additional point here, which is the EU duty within 3% of the UK duty? Because if it's more than that, if the difference, if the gap between the EU duty and the UK duty is more than 3%, and this is the logic behind this is a decision of the EU in the UK in the Joint Committee. There's no particular logical reason for this other than the parties have agreed this, and obviously the EU thought that if the band was bigger than 3%, the incentive was too great, and therefore they said you can't be not at risk, you can't be on the UK trader scheme. So you have to check those. Again, if it's subject to EU trade defence measures, you can't be on the UK trader scheme. If it's commercial processing, it is at risk unless you're in one of those exceptions. The same exceptions as applied for the GB-NI trade. And of course, you still have to meet the end use criteria, selling to consumer-facing facilities. And of course, as with all things to do with the UK trader scheme, you have to have sufficient control over your movement, so you know that they are only going GB-NI, or in this case, rest of world NI, staying in Northern Ireland, and you know that there's no risk of them entering Ireland. So that will determine whether it's at risk or not at risk. If it's not at risk, you pay the UK duty, the UK global tariff. If it's at risk, you pay the European Union common external tariff. So this is the situation for NI to rest of world. Sorry, rest of world to NI. So we go to the next slide. So in summary, quick checks you need to perform. Is the EU common external tariff 0? Can you be on the UK trader scheme? If you can't be on either, if none of those apply, you've got to check the preferential rules of origin, but you can do the duty waiver. If you are a small trader, you should probably go straight to that. If you're not, you can still use the duty waiver to lower that preferential rules if you can't qualify for the preferential tariff because you don't satisfy the rules of origin, and then you can use special customs procedures if none of that applies to you. And if we go to the next slide, information's on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy website again, so please look at that. And if we go to, I think that is the final thing. So now we've got a few minutes for questions.
I know there were a couple of questions forwarded by Anna before the session. One was on error codes, a pretty hot topic at the moment. So with supplementary declarations, there are the vast majority of customers are seeing error codes when they submit a supplementary declaration. And those error codes are not the friendliest in the world, they're a little bit technical. So we have created an error code guide, and it should highlight the most common error codes. There's quite an extensive list in there now. It's on the user guide pages. So that's your first point of reference, is do look up in that guide for your error code. It should show you what the error code is and what the field is that's affected. If that doesn't make any sense, then it's a call to the contact center. They have a more extensive list, and if they can't help you in reasonably short time period, then if you can ask for that to be escalated to one of the consultants, then they'll take you through and help you through some of that submission work. Once a few of these have been completed, then you get used to the process, it is a lot easier. The subsequent ones are a lot easier. So it's a question of getting over that knowledge curve, I'm afraid. But we've invested quite a lot of error guide on there. I've just seen a note from Anne that it doesn't guide you to the right field. The latest guide does have a mix. So there's a combination in the latest guidebook where it's absolutely clear what the which field is causing the problem. We can point you to that field. Some of the error codes are not that helpful that come back from the CDS system, and it says a mismatch of information as something as vague as that, and therefore we can't pin it down to an individual field. So I'm afraid, and if you get stuck, if there's a problem with a supplementary declaration, you hit a brick wall with it, get to the contact center, and if they are not helping, because the tier 1, the front level, they do have additional guidance. If they're not helping in a speedy enough manner, then just has to be use the term escalated to the tier 3 support, and they'll get somebody on to help you there. Oh, Magnus supplied answers.
Yeah. I think we've answered the questions, but Anne is still having trouble. So I think what needs to happen now is Dan, who's also on the call, will connect you with the appropriate tier 3. What we're doing is we are actually affirmatively sending out information to people who are having difficulty, and a tier 3 agent will call you and walk you through the supplementary declaration. So if I can ask Dan to to identify a tier 3 for Anne, so that somebody can walk her through the subdeck process. And just the logic of this, the reason why this is causing a problem is because CDS is a new system, right? So it's very different from the old chief system. The old chief system did not produce these undecipherable error codes, and CDS does, and that's just the reality that we all have to live with. And the error code guide that is now available is the first time anyone's actually gone through those undecipherable error codes and sort of translated them into English. So it's a work in progress, but we are, we continue to do that. But I think, Dan, if you can just connect Anne to the right person and help her with her subdeck, that would be great.
That'd be great, Shankar. There was one thing that I think that maybe you were going to tackle was the export of cars into ROI that come in from GB. There was one particular question there that Anne had at the end as well.
Yeah.
Specific query she had.
So if you're doing that, the Irish government, so TSS has a regular weekly call with the Irish government, including the Irish Revenue Commission, and this was raised on that call. So the Irish government's view is that they were, to be fair, a bit concerned about the UK's unilateral action on the VAT side of things, and so they took the position that they didn't know where the cars were coming from, and they, unless they had the VIN number, they weren't going to allow the sale to go forward. So they asked us to help with that, and we are able to provide in the supplementary declaration a additional information code, Gen 45, which will be available to the Irish IRC, and that will enable them, to take the sort of hold off the sale of cars, and the cars should be able to be sold. Second-hand cars should be able to be sold to Irish people from once we get that in place. So that's how we're handling this.
So Shankar, would it be okay if Dan takes that particular query as well in his call with Dan as well? I think he'd be able to do that, wouldn't he?
Let me take that one for now, and then I'll hand off to Dan, because that is sort of work in progress. And I saw Anne put into the chat box that the Irish is saying they need an SAD. That's because there wasn't an additional information code, and we've literally only in the last probably 24 hours identified the code that we're going to be using, and I've only just communicated that literally this morning to the Irish Revenue Commission.
Yeah, so, and I think the SAD that they refer to is the supplementary declaration. So it's the old term for the chief declaration.
It's simplified. There used to be for new systems a simplified administrative document, which was like a version of the supplementary declaration, and they want something, is the bottom line. The Irish government wants to see something, and they will, I think they will accept the additional information code that we are providing. So I'll handle that with Anne directly if you continue to have a problem. and I will even connect you with the Irish Revenue Commission so they can be satisfied that you've got the relevant VIN number and so on.
There was another question coming in there. If we're registered with the UK Trader Scheme, is there still a grace period of 4 months to declare goods as not at risk? And what happens after this period?
So the question is, when did you register? If you registered before February the 28th, then you are provisionally authorised for 4 months from the date of your registration. In 4 months, the UK government, HMRC, will do a evaluation of those factors that I mentioned in order to determine whether you should be on the UK Trader Scheme. And so you basically have, from 4 months of your registration, provisional authorization. So what does that mean? It means that you should put in the NI-REM code in your supplementary declaration, and there's no tariff, there's no rule of origin, there's no EU-UK trade agreement you need to worry about, because you're making a movement from one part of the UK customs territory to another.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other questions coming in just at the moment, but obviously we're recording this morning, and we have your presentations too, Shank. We can send them on, yourself and Frank, we can send them on to everybody. And if anybody else has any particular questions before we wrap up, there's an opportunity there now there in the next minute. Look, there's a lot of information there to take in this morning for sure. I did ask Dan during the call there about the key issues, and he mentioned about supplementary declaration requests for assistance. Another question was, when will supplementary declarations be due, and process around agri-food and SPS. But he did stress also that the teams are learning, they're getting to answer more questions. The more questions they get, the more queries they do, the more they can be, they can answer the particular queries as well. So it's very much a learning in process as well, which we can understand because you've got such a vast level of queries as well that you have to work through, that it's a gradual process as well. But look, we really would like to thank you, your team this morning, Shankar, for giving us the time. I think I really, you've been a great support to us before January 1st, and now this is our first one after that, and we can see how much work has gone into it. So look, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today, and I would like to thank the team of the TSS and the supporting panelists for the excellent and very informative webinar. As I said, if you have any further queries or questions that we may not have covered today, please forward them to myself or Anna, and we'll try and get the information that you need. And we really do appreciate your continued support of the Chamber. So Shankar, maybe I could hand back to you if there's any particular, Frank, was any particular last points you'd like to make before we finish up?
Sure. Well, I'll use my last point to answer Kevin Hillis's question, which goods received into Northern Ireland subsequently sold to another Northern Ireland company who then export to ROI. So the issue is, if you want to be on the UK Trader Scheme, as long as you are selling to a consumer-facing facility. So what this would mean is, if you're selling to somebody who you might regard as a wholesaler, but they are actually selling to retail themselves and they only sell to retail, that is a consumer-facing facility. What it isn't is if you sell to a sort of general distribution centre that could sell anywhere on the island of Ireland. If that's what you're selling to, then you're not going to be able to benefit from the UK Trader Scheme. And the important point is that you need to have sufficient control over your goods movements GB to NI. And my final point is, if there are any issues that anyone in the Chamber has, please, the best thing to do is go to the contact centre first, because that way we know about your inquiry. We've logged it. We've got a way of triaging it that goes up to ultimately tier 3, ultimately people like Dan, who will answer it. But of course, if you're unhappy or you've got a crisis, you can certainly call Frank and myself, or email us, and we'll help you. But I suggest you do that through the Londonderry Chamber.
Yeah, thank you so much for that and for that support. And yes, we will certainly take you up on that. So thank you so much for your time. So look, that was all I wanted to cover this morning. We could have spent another half an hour at it, but maybe what we might do is we might pencil in another webinar maybe later in the year, whenever you feel is appropriate, Shankar, for any updates that you have. It's great to keep our members informed, and thank you so much for you and your team's support of the Chamber before January 1st and continuing now at the moment. So thank you again, and just wish everybody a very good afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.